Hello friends, so today I'm going to show you how to apply the first 90 days by Michael Watkins into your world in a practical, hands-on way. And make sure you stick around to the end of the video because I'm going to share the one mistake almost everyone makes in their first 3 months and how to dodge it, kind of like Neo in the Matrix. So what is this book actually about? Well, it's simple. It's how not to be a disaster when stepping into a new role. But here's the important thing to remember. The framework Watkins lays out for navigating these first crucial 3 months are not just for starting a new job, but for kicking off a new project, launching a new event, building a new community, working with a new team. There are many different ways in which this can be applied so you don't just survive, but actually set yourself up for long-term success. So what's the big idea? Well, transitions are make or break moments. The habits you set in your first 90 days really determine whether you'll be seen as a game changer or just another name on the payroll. And Watkins gives us a game plan to diagnose your situation, secure early wins, and build the right relationships before the corporate sharks smell fear. So I'm going to cover all of this in this video and give you some really practical things that you can do to get started. Oh, and real quick, if you're new around here, I'm Jono, and I've helped hundreds of companies and thousands of people build dependable audience engagement and communities with less hassle and better results. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to cover 4 really practical things that you can do today from the book. And the first thing is to know which of the 4 transitions you're in, okay? Now let me explain what this is. Watkins basically says that whenever you join any company, any project, any initiative, any mission, that company, project, initiative, mission is in some kind of transitionary state. It's going from one place to another, right? And there are 4 different types of transitions, and knowing which transition you're in will massively guide the things that you do in your first 90 days that will have a huge impact, okay? So I'm going to cover these 4 different transitions and then provide you with some recommendations of things that you can do in the first 90 days in any project, company, initiative, so you're going to have the biggest impact, okay? Okay, so the first transition is the startup one, okay? Again, I'll come back and explain these in just a moment. The second is turnaround. The third is realignment. And the fourth is sustaining success. Okay, so as I go through these, have a think about where you might be with, a project you just joined, a company you're about to join, whatever it might be, okay? So the first one is startup. Basically what this means is that everything is in utter chaos, right? People are just kind of all over the place working on different things. It's not very coordinated. And you're probably going to be regularly putting out metaphorical fires, right, every day. And if you don't move quickly, then those metaphorical fires are going to become metaphorical infernos, okay? So it's a pretty chaotic state when you're in the startup phase, right? So there are 3 things I want to recommend you do in the first 90 days if you're in that phase, okay? So let's get these 3 things down. The first one is to really establish basic processes, right? It's to look at what are the things that we're trying to do here and put some really simple things in place that will make them more streamlined, more consistent, right? So for example, let's say you join a company and social media is very kind of all over the place. You might put a simple process in place for coming up with a whole bunch of social media ideas and then, converting them into drafts and writing images and videos and whatever else and getting them published, okay? That's a simple thing. We actually do this when we work with companies in the community leadership core, is we put in place just really simple basic processes just to get them out the door, get them working as efficiently as possible, right? The second thing is to really focus on quick wins. Is that, a lot of people make this mistake when they join a company or a project in this phase, and they put together a big, complicated PowerPoint deck with all the things they're going to do in this grandiose vision. It's too much, doesn't work. What's going to work is getting in there, rolling your sleeves up, doing some work, and getting some wins, okay? And we're going to talk about quick wins a little bit later on because it's a really important part of what Michael Watkins talks about inside of the book, okay? But the third thing here is to really focus on what are the priorities that you want to put in place. Right? So I'll give you an example of this recently that we've had, right? One of our customers in the community leadership core, we did a kickoff with them last week, and they were very interested in talking about like social media and YouTube and podcast and all these different channels for building growth. But my first question to them was, well, what's the onboarding experience like for people into your product? And they said, well, it's kind of clunky and doesn't work very well. So my feedback to them was, well, I think we should make the onboarding experience your priority, because if you don't get that right, then all of that growth is just going to lead people to a bad experience, right? So the problem with the startup transition is that everyone's so in the middle of everything that they sometimes don't take a step back, look at the priorities, and assemble, solutions for those particular priorities, okay? So these things, if you focus on that in your first 90 days in a new company or project, that's in the startup transition, it's going to serve you really well, okay? Now, what is the turnaround transition? Well, this is where everything is pretty much on fire, right? But you are the person in the hot seat, no pun intended, to figure out what's going on, right? So fixing things here is going to mean identifying what went wrong, who let it happen, what were the circumstances, and then how to rebuild when everybody's kind of panicking and running around, like crazy chickens, right? So this is very common in earlier stage companies. It can also be common in specific teams in bigger companies. This can be the case with projects. Like if you go in, the project's kind of all over the place. Again, this doesn't just apply to joining companies, right? So there are 3 things that you should focus on in the first 90 days here, right? The first one is going to be to diagnose kind of what's going on. Diagnose the issues. Take a look at what's happening. Don't apply too much judgment right out of the gate, and just figure out what is going on, right? And this is where data is going to be particularly important, right? Go and gather data. Don't necessarily listen to people complaining or whining about what's going on, because that can obviously color people's judgment. Just look in an unemotional way of what's happening so we can figure out what we need to fix. The second thing to focus on is stabilizing with fixes. Right, with really simple fixes. So let's say, I'll give you another example. A company we used to work with about a year ago, one of the things that we identified, they were kind of in the turnaround transition, where one of their senior executives was spending 30 to 40 hours crafting a blog post. And our feedback to them was like, that's not a good use of your time. It's not a good way to kind of build a consistent drip feed of content. So that's something we wanted to focus on. So we identified some really simple fixes to just kind of get that number down. Not trying to make it wholesale conversion, getting it down to an hour immediately, but just gradually chipping away, making things easier to kind of navigate. For example, when she was working one of these blog posts, she was doing tons of research. So we were like, why don't you just outsource that research? You can pay someone $100 and they'll do the research for you, for example, okay? The third piece here as well is about rebuilding trust. So this is where, in many cases, when organizations or projects are in this state, and again, people are kind of running around, their hair is on fire and things are not going great, trust gets eroded because people start covering their backs and they're just kind of pointing to other people as the people at fault, right? So getting people together, social events, getting people in environments where they can get to know each other, and even just getting on video calls so you can see body language, is all about building those friendships, and building that culture is really important, okay? So what is the third one here? What does realignment mean? Well, this is where people think that things are fine, but they're actually wrong, right? And that you're going to spend your time convincing everyone that, yeah, your beloved but outdated system is actually ruining everything. So this is where people think that everything is great. Again, this is something we often see with a lot of companies that we're working with, where they've got these like systems and processes in place that are actually incredibly inefficient. And what we want to do is we want to get them to a better system or process. But if we go in there and say, this is terrible, you should completely fix it, that's not going to win anybody any friends. So it's got to be a transitionary state, okay? So again, in the first 90 days, there are 3 things that I'm going to recommend you do here. The first one is to gather data, right? It's to monitor those kind of like outdated, methods and systems or whatever they're doing that's just not working very effectively. And the goal here is to prove that there is something wrong, right? It's to prove it. You've got a hypothesis that what's happening is not good, but you need to prove the hypothesis is correct, that something is not working very well in that company, in that organization. Same thing can apply to projects. Like if somebody's operating in a particular way in a project and it's just not very good, then gather the data to prove that. So you can go objectively and say, Here's a thing that we don't think is working very well. Now what we're going to do is to go to the next step, which is to align the team on a need to fix it, right? Where you basically say, can we just acknowledge that this is something that isn't working as effectively as possible? Wouldn't it be interesting if we explore a small amount of work to make this more efficient, more effective? And then the third piece here is where you go and implement and iterate, right? So let me give you an example of this. I'm actually going to go back to the example previously where the executive was spending 30 hours on a blog post. The first thing we wanted to do here was we kind of looked at the amount of time. We asked her to track the amount of time she was spending on blog posts within a month, and it was just hours and hours and hours and hours. And then so we identified that's a lot of her time. And then what we did is we aligned the team that, would we agree that this is too much time spent on the blog post? This is something we kind of want to figure out a way of a solution for. They agreed. So then we started implementing we started suggesting some small fixes and changes, like the research being outsourced in a way that they could implement them. And then based upon how that was working, we kept just improving and improving through the process of iteration. Okay. So what is the fourth transition here, right? Well, again, there's three things I'm going to recommend here. But this fourth transition is when things are just kind of working well, right? So things are successful, and you don't want to break what's already working. So your job is to basically keep the machine running and just optimize where you can and not be the person who flips the wrong switch, in the wrong direction, or the right switch in the wrong direction, whatever. Okay. So what we want to do here, is, again, three things. Is we want to really focus on maintaining momentum. This might sound odd as a thing to focus on in your first 90 days, but you just want to make sure that things are continuing to work. But what you do is you prevent stagnation, right? So stagnation is something you do not want to happen, right? Because often what can happen when things are ticking over is sometimes that can be boring because people are interested in solving problems and doing new things. And if things are working well, people can often get a bit bored and it could become a bit stagnant. So you want to keep things rolling, okay? The second thing you want to do is to identify small improvements, right? So, an example of this was actually another company that we've worked with where they have kind of a release process in which they release their product, in which they release their software. And everything's been really kind of ticking over pretty nicely. But they're in this kind of, sustaining success mode, certainly when it comes to that element of their company. But what we wanted to do is to just add like little adjustments to improve just how that software gets released, but also the visibility on it. So one of the things that we put in place was just a way of kind of capturing release notes and how those release notes got published and made visible on social media, on YouTube, on other platforms as well. Okay, small little adjustment, and then it's going to move them in the right direction. But the key thing here as well is to keep morale high, because it's ironic that when you have an organization or a project that's really successful, that's typically when people will start getting a hunger to go and do something new. Many people like working on problems, on like fixing things that are broken, and everything success and everything working in the right direction is honestly boring for a lot of people. Okay, so you got to keep that morale high and then be constantly innovating within the context of this. Okay, so the first question I would have for you is, which one of these four transitions would you say you're in as you think about the company or the project that you're stepping into? Okay, now if you're finding this helpful so far, I would love it if you could throw a like on this video. Likes make a huge difference for a small channel such as mine. It takes you just a moment to do it, but it really does help a lot. And if you were to throw a sub on this channel, well, oh my God, that would be amazing. So that would be fantastic, but no pressure, just if you're finding this kind of stuff useful. All right. So now what I'm going to do is, first of all, is move my notes, and we're going to talk about the second element here. Okay, let me move this out of the way. So the second component of what Watkins talks about, and this is quick wins. Now, we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier on, that when we talked about the startup transition, identifying basic processes to put in place, and then delivering quick wins as opposed to coming up with big grandiose visions. This is what he talks about that we should do in every transitionary phase, right? And in the first 90 days of any new company that you join, any new project that you join, any new team that you take over, you want to be delivering those quick wins. But what does a quick win mean? Well, a quick win can be something as small as like improving one particular type of metric. It could be that, you get a little bit of kudos or congratulations in a Discord channel. It could be, just that that a customer kind of comes up to you and they tell you that this particular thing that a member of your team has done really helped them save 10 minutes, right? These are like little things that you do where the team will feel, you and the team will feel really happy about what's going on. So the point of this is that instead of thinking of like big moments where we tend to think of big moments and changes in what we're doing, think about the really small wins. So let me give you a couple of examples of what to focus on here, right? So this is going to be things like, imagine you've got a community manager, right? And they join a SaaS company. They should not try to overhaul everything. Instead, it could be, an engagement fix, right? So let's say you go in there, you identify engagement is a little bit low on a forum or a Discord channel, whatever, and you're able to apply some changes and it just goes up by 1 or 2%. Great, that's a quick win. Another one could be focusing on conversion rates, right? So let's say you are a marketer and you go in and you identify that the open and click rates in the emails of the company are a little bit low. You make a couple of changes and you get that conversion rate up. Boom, quick win. Another example could be, let's say you identify popular topics on your social media channels, right? So you find, these, 3 or 4 topics seem to be of particular interest. This is really insightful. It's a quick win to know that, but then you start putting some content out there and then you get more quick wins, right? Another example here could be testimonials, right? This is something we talk to our customers about all the time is, at least once a quarter, just go up to the people who love the work that you're doing and just say, would you mind writing us a sentence about what you think about the work that we're doing? You get 4 or 5 of those and put them into an email and share them with the team, share them with your boss. Quick win, right? And it really is a quick win. Doesn't take a lot. Let's say you've got a YouTuber who's focusing on building a YouTube channel, right? Well, I think here, just a lot of this can be just being responsive, right? So if you are responsive to your, comments and you're fostering discussions, and then what happens is that you find that people are leaving more and more comments, boom, quick win. So the point here is that, pick which transition you're in. These give you a sense of what are the things you should do in the first 90 days, and then focus within these of just delivering these quick wins over and over again. This is absolutely critical in what you're doing, okay? All right, so now let's talk about the third component of what Watkins talks about in the book, all right? And this is really focusing on building relationships. Does that say relationships? It does now. Okay. The point that he makes in the book is that as you're doing all this stuff, you pick your transition, you pick the things you're going to do in the first 90 days, you start delivering quick wins. It's really important throughout that process to make sure that you are building relationships in a strategic capacity at every step of the way. And basically what he talks about are kind of 3 layers of relationships, okay? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give myself a little bit more space. I'm going to get rid of stagnation because we never want stagnation, okay? And we've basically got 3 layers, okay? We've got upward, we've got sideways, and then we've got downward. Make sure I don't run out of space here. So upward relationships are basically with your boss, right? These are the relationships with your boss, with your management, with your leadership, okay? Sideways is when you're focusing on your colleagues. Make sure I can spell, I was going to say team, because I don't think I can spell colleagues without a spell checker. And then downward is where you're talking about, your team, right? So this is going to be your team and your peers. Okay. So what are the things that we should do in building relationships? What's really critical that Watkins talks about is you need to make sure you're always building relationships in each of these 3 levels at any one given time. You don't just pick one level, like in the same way that we pick one of these. You should be doing this all of the time. So there's a couple of things I want to recommend here. When it comes to your boss, the first thing is you should regularly provide updates on progress, right? One of the things that we do with our customers in the Community Leadership Core that's been super popular is we have a quarterly summary. It's basically a template that we designed. You just go and fill it in once a quarter. And this is where you can show the quantifiable numbers and, results that you've kind of generated, as well as the qualitative input on, what people think about the work that you're doing. It shows, content that you've created. It shows pictures of you getting together with your audience and your community and other folks. But once a quarter, just that update, it can take less than 5 minutes for your boss to read, just really delivers a lot of confidence in the work that you're doing. So updates is one, okay? The other thing that's critical here, and I'll put it here, is to focus on priorities alignment, right? So basically, make sure that you're always really clear on what are the priorities that your boss has got, and that the work that you choose to do in whichever transition you're in is aligned with what they want to be achieving as well. If your boss is very clear with what they need to achieve and you can be in service of what your boss needs, you're going to build an amazing relationship. You're going to be very successful in your career, okay? And then the third one here is around problem solving. One thing that I think it's kind of a secret that people don't know about is if you work for somebody, right? So I've had teams the whole chunk of my career that work for me. And when somebody comes up to me and they say, oh, I've got this problem, right? And there's no solution, they're not proposing a solution, I consider that to be way worse than if somebody comes up to you and they say, I've got this problem, but I've tried this to try and solve it, I've not been able to solve it, and I'd like to figure out what a solution could be, and I've got some ideas in it. That's a way better scenario. So don't just go to your boss with problems. Go to your boss and identify problems, but suggest solutions and play a role in fixing those problems as well, right? And that's going to have a huge impact as well. So just do these as a matter of course. Now, sideways is when you're engaging with your colleagues and your team and your peers, right? There's a couple of things that you want to do here, right? The first one is to offer help, right? So whenever you meet your team or your colleagues, like I'm talking about your team that you're a part of, not the team that report into you. If you've got a team that reports into you, just always focus on being useful to other people. And when you do that, people appreciate it, builds a certain sense of reciprocity, and they want to engage with you, they want to help you out as well in the future, okay? The second thing here is to focus on active listening. Active listening, right? So, when you meet up with somebody, one of your colleagues, one of your peers, instead of just immediately launching into all the things that you're dealing with, just say, hey, how are you doing? How's the family? How's the weekend? What are some of the things you're working on? Just pay an interest in them in terms of their job, but also just them as a human being and their life, okay? And then the other thing as well that's critical here is just being collaborative. Is just making sure that you're using like the collaborative tools that are in place and being a team player in the work that you're doing, right? So instead of trying to do everything separately to how the team's operating, show up where the team's operating and engage with them, okay? It sounds like a simple thing, but it has a huge impact. So these are the three things you want to do when you're working with your peers, when you're working with your colleagues, okay? But the downward one is if you have a team that works for you. So this won't apply to everyone who's watching this video, but when building relationships and maintaining relationships with your team is critical. A few things to do here. The first one is to make sure you're providing clarity, right? It's to make sure that your team are always super clear on how is the work that we're doing being judged, and how do we make sure that we're always clear on like what we need to be doing and moving forward. This is the biggest complaint that people have with their managers when they don't have clarity is, I don't really know what my manager wants from me, but they expect me to do great work, and I'm not entirely sure what I should be doing. And I'm kind of afraid to go and ask at this point. So be proactive with the clarity. The second thing is to recognize, right? So recognize great work, right? When somebody does something, no matter how small it will be, recognize and respect the work that they're doing. I, just as a matter of course, always try to say to my team members, thanks for all the hard work, really appreciate what you've been doing, or, you've done a really great job with something. Don't do it in a way that you don't mean it, right? So actually mean it when you do it, but always make giving respect and giving kudos a fundamental part of how you operate. If you forget to do this, write it on a Post-it note and put it on your monitor. remember to give kudos, right? That's going to help a lot. And then the final thing here as well is to be approachable, right? Is to make sure that your team feel like they can come and talk to you about anything. It reminds me, we have a young son, right? And he's 12 years old. And a little while ago, I had the birds and the bees conversation with him, And I was chatting to a couple of the other parents. I was chatting to this one other parent who was mortified that I'd had that conversation. She was like, I would never have that conversation with our son. That's for the school to talk about. And my feedback to her was, why would I do that? Like, I want him to feel like he can not just come and talk to me about that particular topic, about the birds and the bees and, all the rest of it, but about anything, right? So making me approachable and broaching that subject in a way that doesn't feel weird and embarrassing, in my mind, is part of being a good parent, and it's part of being a great boss as well. So, again, just to recap where we are right now, you got your 4 transitions. Pick one of these transitions. These are the kind of things you can do in the first 90 days. Make sure you're regularly delivering quick wins in the work that you're doing. And then throughout that, focus on building relationships with these practical things that you can do at all 3 layers. And make sure you are building relationships at every layer, right? Don't skip a layer. Make sure it's always with your manager, always with your peers, always with your team if you have a team, okay? All right, by the way, if you want to build really consistent kind of growth and engagement with an audience, if you want to build a fan base, if you want to build a community, you should totally check out the Community Leadership Core. We're kind of like a personal trainer for companies who want to build this kind of engagement. We help you to figure out what work will have the biggest impact. We'll look at that work, we'll provide tactical and strategic guidance on how to do it efficiently and as effectively as possible. And then we hold you accountable. We check in and make sure that we're always moving the needle and heading in the right direction. So if you want to find out more about that, go check out the link in the video description down there. All right, so I mentioned earlier on that everybody makes a key mistake. And what I want to do is I'm first of all going to kind of delete. I'm going to remove all of this because I've made a bit of a mess here. And then I'm going to talk about this final thing that's really critical. So the biggest mistake, what is it? Well, people try to prove themselves way too quickly. They go into a new company, into a new organization, into a new project, into a new initiative, and it's just kind of like they charge in guns blazing, making changes really before they've even read the room, right? And you don't want to do that, right? For example, new executives will kind of go in and they'll try to implement sweeping changes before really understanding the culture, right? If you change everything before people trust you, they're going to resist, and they're going to resist really, really hard. Another example will be community builders who assume that their engagement strategy will work without really testing what actually motivates their audience, right? Your brilliant new content calendar, well, it's useless if no one cares, right? So the key lesson here is to stop, to listen, to learn. Yeah, you need the quick wins, like we talked about earlier on, but don't assume you know everything on day one. The smartest people really kind of ask the best questions before they make the big moves. So it's such a simple thing to cap this video with, but it's something that I see all the time with people who join new organizations. And I've made this mistake, right? I remember when I joined XPRIZE years ago, I just kind of did the opposite of what I'm recommending in this video. I went in there, I had this big deck where I was saying, I'm going to go and recommending we do all this. And what I realized in those first couple of months was people don't want that. They just want you to get to work and start delivering some quick wins, okay? So anyway, make sure you focus on just listen, learn, follow the process that I walked through this video, and it's really going to set you up for success. Now, a fundamental element of making all of this successful is going to be about building good habits, right? And if you go and check out this video over here, I'm going to show you some really practical recommendations from a great book called Atomic Habits by James Clear. I'm going to do exactly the kind of same thing I did in this video. I'm going to give you an introduction, overview of the book, what it is, and the key insights in it, and how you can practically apply it in your world. So go check that out, and I'll see you there.